biggest issue often is actually deriving insight from the data. It's one thing having a lot of data. It's another thing actually, well, what do I do with this? What's this telling me? Really, day to day, how many people are actually using the space that they're paying for?
I whinge a lot about you can't buy what you don't know exists.
There's an education piece where people don't even know what to ask, what to compare, what to expect. The better advised occupiers are, if the drive comes from them, I think only at that point will we start to see a change.
You can't improve what you can't measure, right? So welcome to The Good, The Bad, The PropTech. I'm delighted today to be joined by Josh Pattison from SHB, who is the Director of Technologies. We're hopefully going to dive into the world of why on earth a property company has a Director of Technology, which hopefully there'll be more of them. But Josh, look, I think the best way to probably kick this off is if you could introduce yourself and tell us a little bit more about what you do at SHB, and hopefully we'll go into the journey that you've been on over the last 5 years.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks for having me, Freddie. It's a pleasure to be here. And yeah, like you said, I'm Director of Technology at SHB. So my primary role is kind of overseeing all of the sort of data and technology within the company. And, at a core, we are still an occupier advisory firm. We are there to help our clients not only find their next office space, but effectively manage their office and their portfolio.
Okay.
But the way that we go about that is very much kind of data-led, and we've developed some platforms to help enhance that experience as well.
Amazing. So how did you end up where you are today then? What was your journey before SHB? What were you
Yeah, it's a good story,
as?
actually. I was working in more of the kind of tech space before this, no previous background in property. I was working for a tech agency and actually got introduced to Simon, who's our CEO. We were running a kind of a few test projects for him. He's classic entrepreneur, always got these ideas, and we actually got put in touch, and he said, look, I've got this crazy idea about trying to find out who's in certain buildings and things like that. Can we run a bit of a pilot together? So we did a kind of project together. Got on really well.
Yeah.
And then about kind of 9 months later, he just called me up and said, look, I'm wanting to kind of pivot what SHB is doing. We want data and technology to be at the forefront. Would you be up for coming on board and building it out? Sort of build a team, build out some products so that we can do something different to kind of change the way the industry's operating. So.
Okay. And why was the decision made to build in-house as opposed to buy off the shelf? Right, there's an abundance of technology out there. Was there ownership of IP? Did you find that there wasn't what Simon wanted, therefore the only option was to build, or what was the journey?
I think it's a mixture of the two. I think there's definitely an ownership of IP element. There's no doubt about that. But I think also just Simon's always been very hot on the ability to be agile and scale quickly. And when we were starting out, when we had a smaller team, we did have to rely on other platforms, other parties to get us to a certain point. But the ability to pivot, the ability to change quickly when you're relying on third parties, and sometimes it is a challenge, as anyone who's worked with them will have experienced. And so there was always this drive to, if we're going to be able to deliver that level of service, we just need that in-house capability to be able to do it at speed and at scale. So that was always kind of the forefront of his thinking.
Yeah. So what are kind of the challenges for those that might not have ever had interactions with the wonderful world of large technology businesses when you're asking for data? Is it cost? Is it integrations, or just getting time with the tech team, or is it kind of all of the above?
Yeah, it is a mixture of all the above. And I think we've tried to build a team that and process internally that gives the right level of exposure to each of the different departments. And data is always going to be the key aspect of it, not only internally, but what we've been focusing on in terms of being able to provide companies with insights when they're planning their office move. You've got to have access to the right sources to do that sort of thing, which is again never easy, particularly in our industry when I'd say it's probably one of the harder industries to access certain data points, because everyone seems very protective over everything. You look at the likes of even kind of fintech and things like that, where so much now has been made sort of public access, open source, in order to just actually deliver a better experience. I feel like we've still got a way to go to get there, but we're certainly trying.
Yeah. And obviously you've talked kind of high level about the data side of what you guys do. Like, I suppose the obvious question is, when you're advising occupiers, like what was the what's the data that was missing that you couldn't readily get? And what is the thing that you're kind of focusing on when you're talking to businesses like, okay, we can give you this data on your workspace or this data on your office move? Like, what are kind of like the really key bits of data that you actually go in and talk about? Because obviously if you keep saying the word data, and we're like, what
is it?
Yeah.
No, absolutely. Yeah. And so we've built kind of 3 platforms internally that help different parts of the client journey. And I think, the one that specifically is around the office move, it was very much about empowering businesses to make sort of data informed decisions. So in the past, we've had experiences where, a certain individual within the business has decided on a certain area for the office, and that's where everyone just goes.
The CEO.
Usually the CEO.
Yeah. So this is the easiest commute for me. I'd like to move here.
Exactly. Yeah.
Glad to see things haven't changed.
And there is now slowly but surely a change to actually wanting to know, well, where is the best location for us, and how do we make an informed decision on that basis? And that there's a number of elements that have to go into that: availability, obviously market rent data based on budgets, location analysis in terms of travel times, commute costs, and more recently sort of ESG elements as well in terms of choosing a building that actually meets the requirements that companies are wanting. And so what we've done is, and I continue to do, is build a platform that kind of brings as much of that data together. So when we are working and advising with our clients, we can actually give them that information to make the right decision based on what their kind of, I suppose, the key factors that are important to them are.
But I suppose is a combination of that a bit of trust, right? Because I'd imagine when you're talking about commute data, that's employee information where they live. So is there a bit of tension and explanation to go, we need this data to do this? Or are they quite happy to kind of hand it over to you to say, look, we kind of understand we need to be a bit more scientific about it? Or are they quite open to go, we see the value in the data you're going to give back to us, so we're happy to share this information?
It's a real mixed bag. I think, I think more and more clients are becoming, aware that in order to make that decision, you've got to have access to the data. Obviously, we put things in place in terms of, NDAs and anonymizing the data. So actually, in terms of any form of kind of, I suppose, risk or security elements, it's at a minimum. So often it's a kind of educational piece of, in order to give you this level of advice, we will need the, access to this for this reason. And once we go through that process, I'd say sort of 9 out of 10 companies actually are
quite happy to have the feedback from it. Yeah, that's interesting. And has there been any like good examples where the CEOs picked, I don't know, Shoreditch, and actually the data said, no, you need to be in the South Bank? Have you had any like real clear, the mindset was one way and the data was the other, and what was the outcome from those kind of conversations? Did they listen to the data, or do they go, no, I still can't be bothered to get 2 train lines to get there, so we're going to move here?
It's an interesting one. So we've had a few situations where the data has provided almost not necessarily conflicting, but alternative options that would be
very diplomatically put
better suited for the business's needs. And in some cases, that has been actually, a real, I suppose, helpful approach to say, well, you've not even considered these locations, these submarkets, although travel time might be up, sort of 5-6%. What you're going to save on your rent roll is significantly higher. So we have been able to have those conversations where they have pivoted. Yeah. But, I'd be lying if I said there weren't some situations where, regardless of the data, there was still a decision made because of an individual.
Fine. Well, good. I think it's always important to say, like, whilst you can give people the perfect data, doesn't always mean that the behaviours will follow the data, right?
It's their decision, and we're here to kind of just give them the best advice that they can get. Really.
Enable it. Well, I can't not scratch the itch of ESG requirements in buildings. I've spoken a lot about the elusive ESG credentialed building, and no one's been able to really tell me what that is. So what in your data review of buildings would you qualify as an ESG credential or requirement for a business?
Yeah, that's a good question. And that part of the data is I suppose the component that we are missing the most, just because of, again, access to that. One, access to that information, and 2, I think the number of buildings that are actually almost at a point where they even have that kind of those capabilities available, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally.
So we're at a point where we're quite early on in that phase of it, but we're getting more requests for it, particularly for some of these larger occupiers. That is, it's sustainability is a core part of their business. They want to make sure that that's being seen through from everything, including the actual buildings that they're occupying. So for us, it's now a case of, well, actually, where can we get that information to in a way that's kind of automated and not a very manual process, which at the moment that side of it is
very manual. Yeah, it's an interesting thing that came up was in previous conversations has been around kind of the disparity between business requirements for sustainability data and like building accreditations like BREEAM or neighbors going, the building's got this, therefore it is ESG, versus a business going, well, I actually need these things from a financial. Do you see there's a bit of a disparity between those requests of like what business wants and what the building can give them from like, we have these things, or is that not necessarily, I suppose, is it too immature to say?
Yeah, it's quite early on. I think, again, there's definitely an immaturity that is and will change. I think the clients we are working with that have, I suppose, that awareness are often the ones that want specific things. They want certain elements that they have access to and can control. And so often, those accreditations are good, but they still want to know, about the specifics
what
that are important to them.
Actually is in it. Yeah. Great that it's silver. What do I actually get?
Exactly. And whereas I think for everyone else, the accreditations are a nice kind of badge, which is okay for now. But I think more and more we'll see people wanting those specifics.
Yeah. And do you think, down to the nature of it, if it's being led by businesses, do you see a role that, obviously not your data team, but the surveyors, as it were, having to become a bit more kind of tech savvy around these things that are in buildings and the relevance of them? Like, do you see that as a need? Has it got better or worse? Like, are these things being spoken about? Like, kind of, are you educating a client about it, or the client's educating you about, we want to know this data, and you're like, right, okay, I've got to go and find this from somewhere?
Yeah.
Or do you feel are you telling them, just so you know, these things are possible for us to get for you? Is that relevant?
Yeah, I think that's that's a really important point. And at the end of the day, most occupiers are still led by their agents. And so from our perspective, we feel it does need to be driven from that perspective. There will be some clients that are more aware of it and have certain requirements, but there's many that there's a huge education piece needed in terms of what even they could be looking for and asking for. And I think we're going through a process of ensuring our surveyors are ahead of the times with that and are up to speed. But from what we've seen, I wouldn't say that's the general consensus. It's often an afterthought or something that's purely driven by the minority rather than the majority.
Yeah, that's interesting. So I suppose the educational part is one of the biggest challenges, right? Is that surveyors have got a huge amount of things to process and think about, and actually technology and sustainability is kind of another one on that very long list of things they've got to know about the building, as well as all the amenities and the fun stuff. I suppose one thing that you didn't mention, but I'd be interested to know if that's coming up in conversations, is cybersecurity around buildings. Is that, I know there's not a standard or a benchmark, but is that something that you think or you see being spoken about more now, or still kind of in the wings of location, commute, budget, where the CEO lives, sustainability? Like, is cyber coming into conversations yet, or is it still pretty early?
Again, it's quite early, and I think it depends on the company. When we're working with tech companies or finance companies, yes, it is very much at the forefront of it. I think, again, for most other businesses, it isn't yet, and I don't think there's even potentially an awareness of the more intelligent the building gets and the availability of the technology, the more potential risk there is, and there should be considerations around that. So I think there's a bit of catching up to do in that regard, but we are getting asked by those companies that have I suppose an awareness of it.
Yeah, and expertise in it. It's going like, we manage this every day, or we get asked these questions by our customers, so we should probably ask them about our workspace, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's sometimes hard to get if the person you're asking has got no idea about what you're talking about as well, right?
Yeah. And that is a challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose we often talk that real estate doesn't have like a GitHub repository of information about them. It is very siloed. There are different systems you need to connect to get even access to basic data about a building, let alone like even just the size of it accurately. It might be listed in 4 different places of 4 different sizes, right? So there's a huge way to go to build a centralized data platform for real estate, which means platforms like what you guys run is, can tap into those things and build it out. But have you seen, other than kind of sustainability, you've been building it right for 5 years or so, longer?
6 years now.
6 years. Okay, fine. With I can't not say I've got my buzzwords ticked off. You said ESG, so I nailed that. I've said cyber, and obviously AI, large language models.
Yeah.
Has that has that changed what you guys are building? Has it changed expectations from clients going, what are you using around it? Like, has AI changed your roadmap of where you guys are going? And has it changed client expectations of what you can give them?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's very few businesses I think that wouldn't say that it has. I think there's two sides to that in terms of, I suppose, what it's enabled us to do in terms of actual capabilities of the product, and then client expectation of it. I think in terms of from a product perspective, we're able, as a result, to do more with less. The aspects that we're able to access and analyze through using LLMs is vastly superior to what we were able to do a few years ago. And so ultimately that means that some of the analysis we're able to run, some of the data points we're able to plug into, ultimately it's about giving the client better access and more accurate responses for their kind of scenarios. In terms of their expectation, I think one of the elements around people sort of becoming accustomed to using AI LLMs is there's an ease at which they feel that they can be more educated than they perhaps are. And I think we're finding that sometimes there's not necessarily a reluctance to want to interact, but there's almost a case of, well, why should we be using your services if we can just ask the sort of similar things of an AI agent, right?
Well, that's kind of the we've certainly seen this rebirth of we can just build it ourselves, which I think is quite scary, especially in real estate, because when they did it sort of almost 10 years ago, they spent a lot of money and didn't get a lot of outcome from it. So, but I just would wonder, it's interesting to know that do you find having those conversations now being like, well, I could probably just do this myself using Claude or OpenAI or whatever, versus actually like, no, we've done this for 6 years. We've trained the model. We have a data set. We know what we're doing. Whereas if you do it, you'll probably spend a lot of time, effort and money and get to a worse outcome than we can give you because we've done it before. Like, is it that simple, or is it still a few people going, I know better than you, I can do it myself?
Yeah. I mean, I think there will always be an element of one or two that feel they can, but actually we find often, once we're able to show them how it works and interacts, to take them through, yes, there is a kind of there is years of experience that have gone into what we've developed, but ultimately it's pairing not just the tool, but actually the expertise of the surveyor. And ultimately, yes, running some location analysis, I don't doubt that you'll be able to use Claude yourself to do that, but being able to then, based on the analysis, actually, engage with the landlords, actually assess requirements. There is a whole human element of that is still and will be vital. And that's where the pairing, of the two is so key. And that's often that's often the reason that we will still engage, is because they then understand it's not just some recommendations and they go and do it themselves. That's just the start of their journey. And there's a lot more value add that we're able to bring because of that expertise that right now isn't replaceable.
Yeah. Okay. Which is always good to know for people, especially those in surveying world, that it's like, don't worry, AI can't do it all for you. So you're still needed to have the refinement. And I suppose I would imagine part of that's probably to do with the inconsistencies of availability data, like as an example. Whereas if you ask what's available in SW1, it might give you a list of things that are fundamentally wrong. Whereas someone who's in the market will actually know, well, no, that's under offer. That's construction.
That's it. That is the biggest challenge. Is there is no one unified data set at all, and the amount of things that still happen, that are still happening off market that haven't yet come online and that people aren't aware of. That is still a huge part of what goes on. And, if data is not available, then you can't access it. So until something, fundamentally changes on that front, we'll still be in the same situation.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that sort of like as a industry, real estate gets pretty well lambasted for being laggards in adoption of technology. But I suppose part of it is that the unstructured data, the relationship, the context of information that can't actually be processed, like off market availability. Like why would if it's off market, I'm not going to go and put it into a brochure and put it on the internet where a large language model can find it. So it's interesting how like people have been touting about how AI is going to absolutely destroy the industry, but I think there's still an intrinsic relationship part of it and things that you just simply can't find. But I suppose, will there ever actually be a point where you can predict that it might be structured and easy to find, or do you feel this is a moat that we've got as real estate for a little bit longer?
Yeah, I think it's
It's a
still
big
going to.
question. I
I
appreciate
don't know.
it.
It's a huge question. I mean, from my perspective, I still think it's going to be a long time before we see that. Everyone there's, slowly but surely, there's definitely more of a willingness to adopt technology and AI, but it's still very much kind of internal efficiencies and things like that. It's not ranging beyond that. And like you said, it's an older industry built on older processes and relationships, which
Paper.
still very much want to be controlled and protected. And like you
Yeah.
said, until there's a fundamental shift on that, there can only be so much change.
Yeah.
And I think from our perspective, we very much want our surveyors to be doing more with the clients. And so our approach to investing in technology isn't to replace them, but to empower them to be able to do more and provide better advice, and let the technology do the hard work and the hard lifting,
the grunty bit.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's one phase of it. The next phase is actually it kind of revolutionizing the actual industry itself, which at the moment there seems to be a bit of a ceiling to that happening.
Yeah, I suppose it is also the combination of the fragmented ownership. When you have 100 different landowners that own one shop on one street, like how are you going to buy into a centralized database unless it's a government mandate? Which,
exactly.
Best of luck with that.
Yeah.
I think the government got a few other things to worry about, especially at the moment. I suppose one thing, obviously, very selfishly, as a person who spends a lot of time inside buildings, within the data set you look at, do you ever look at sort of internal technologies that businesses, do they provide you with? Occupancy sensor data? Do they ask about air quality or electrical submetering? Is there any like sort of specific products that you've seen the client said, hey, we've got this data set, can you add this into your analysis? Or are you still working with businesses that have absolutely no technology within their demise?
A bit of both.
Okay.
One of the products we developed is a kind of, I suppose it's a lease management and insights tool for that purpose, where some of the larger occupiers that have multi-sites, the biggest issue often is actually deriving insight from the data. It's one thing having a lot of data. It's another thing actually, well, what do I do with this? What's this telling me?
Yeah.
And doing it in a way that's just clean and simple and not overcomplicated.
Yeah. You don't need to have a data analytics degree to actually understand what that number actually means.
Yeah, exactly. So part of the reason for us building one of the products was to just kind of be that interactive dashboard that plugs everything in. And so we are working with some clients that, as part of that, they want to understand live occupancy levels within certain sites. They want to understand the operating, OPEX costs of those buildings to see where more efficiencies can be gained. And so for those ones, they are actually asking us of those questions. Look, we're working with these technologies. Can you plug those into the product?
Okay.
And part of our advice is actually educating clients to start to do that more, because ultimately that's, if you've not got the data, you're not even thinking about it, then you can't make the decisions to know where to change.
Yeah.
So, but that's definitely the minority at the moment.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I whinge a lot about you can't buy what you don't know exists. And for a lot of people, there are hundreds of sensor providers in the market, but what do you type into Google or even ChatGPT to get the answer to that question? Like how can I find my occupancy? Is then will give you a whole ream of products and services. So it's one of the reasons why if the person doesn't know they need the data, they would never go looking for it.
Yeah.
And I suppose in the building interrogation piece, I'd imagine, are you potentially going to be looking at kind of what data the building can give to occupiers as opposed to what they have in their demise? Do you see value in knowing what the landlord can offer to a business when they're going into it on a data occupancy perspective?
I think absolutely. I think that's where we'd like to see more buildings with that, I suppose, open book capability, so that when we are advising occupiers, it can be on that basis. And again, if you know what the building can offer, again, the ability for you to actually then analyze that data is at your fingertips. And I think, again, a lot of clients aren't even aware to be thinking about or asking those questions, let alone that's something that they could be monitoring and tracking. So it's definitely something that we are kind of wanting to push more and are starting to ask.
Yeah. And from obviously the long-term management then, like what are the use cases that people come back to look at the dashboard for? Is it occupancy? Is it lease event? What's kind of the things that make the advice sticky or the product sticky to long-term customers from a lease perspective or an occupancy perspective?
Yeah, I think there's two key elements. One is just, like you said, giving them that kind of centralized source of truth for all of their property data.
Yeah.
From an occupier perspective, I'm still amazed as to how many companies don't know, the information about their lease or information about the building or the property and in how many different places those things are. You know, when we go through an onboarding process, often some of those challenges are actually just getting hold of that information naturally. So I think a core offering is actually just having that centralized, you know, on the cloud, secure, knowing where it is, who can access it, and keeping it up to date is one. But I think the more useful use cases that we're seeing is then actually moving forward, and as the businesses grow and evolve, how do they effectively manage their portfolio? And that's where the likes of occupancy comes in. You know, being able to ascertain what buildings are being utilized, overutilized, underutilized when they're going through M&As. You know, and needing to work out where to consolidate based on, you know, break and location and occupancy. Having access to that data makes that decision making so much easier. And again, it just brings those things to light, which otherwise it just becomes, you know, a convoluted process of, you know, internal affairs, really.
Yeah. Well, it also becomes, I'd imagine, a sentiment discussion. We need more space. It's like, well, your occupancy is less than 50%. So I'm pretty sure you probably either need to get your team back in, or maybe you don't need 50%. And here's the data, right? Which is going back to your original statement of like the data backed decisions as opposed to just making a finger in the air guess of it. With businesses change and growing in M&A, like we've heard examples. I think my favorite one was an international business that missed a load of breaks in America because the way in which they input the addresses is different between month and day between Europe and the US. Yeah. So they missed a load of break dates because they assumed it was a month and it was a day. With regards to like onboarding and cleaning data, is that a big part of just finding it but then cleaning it up? Is that a real challenge, or is that getting easier now, I suppose, with products that you can leverage like AI?
Yeah, it's definitely getting easier. But it is, you know, there's definitely an onboarding part of our process that is standardizing their data into a format that is, you know, is usable. And I think when you're dealing with international locations with different formats, different currencies, you know, that becomes even more critical. And we have seen examples where, again, even internally, things are kept in a UK format when they should be US, and so that is a challenge. And again, unless you've got a centralized tool that, you know, almost is I don't want to say idiot proof, but idiot proof. You know, there's
human proof.
There's room. There's just room for that error. And you know, and that actually can be as simple as just people not being aware of when key break notices are coming up and missing those to the point that it costs them. I mean, we've heard horror stories of it costing them almost, you know, $500,000 because they're then locked in for another term. I mean, it's mad, but it happens.
It happens, yes, because I suppose it's the important context always with real estate is that it's not necessarily the business's function.
Yeah.
The business is doing what the business does. So if they're in fintech or they're in any sort of industry, the real estate part of it is the enabler for what they do. It's not what they won't often have an in-house real estate team depending on their size. Therefore, it kind of falls to someone to be aware of it in between their actual day job they get paid to do, right? So I imagine that's why being able to have a notification or being told like, hey, just so you know, if you don't send this letter by this day, you're going to, you know, cost the business potentially £500,000, especially because your occupancy is growing massively. So it seems quite simple, but I'd imagine, you know, the reason why you guys exist is that it doesn't always happen in practice with businesses that might be going through a big growth curve. I suppose then along the way, and this is kind of an open question, what other data do you think that businesses are missing that they should have or should be caring about? Do you find yourself walking away from meetings being like, I really wish we could get this information because it would help us massively? Or do you feel that what you have at the moment is kind of enough?
Yeah, I think there's a long way to go. And I think, you know, part of what we've discussed is, you know, there's with some businesses, there's a desire to want to track some of that data, but there's just right now no means of accessing it. So I think, you know, occupancy is one that is, you know, it's so useful to know, you know, particularly with a lot of businesses still running hybrids, you know, really day to day, how many people are actually using the space that they're paying for, you know, and what are the peaks, you know, what are the lows, and very few businesses right now can tell us that or actually have the means of going about that without having to go through a process of investing in further technology because the buildings they're in don't even offer it. So I think that's definitely an element that, you know, having that really gives, you know, a level of insight to make decisions. Definitely.
Why do you think that businesses don't have it then? Just because the investment, the awareness, or the fact that buildings don't provide it? Where do you see the buck stopping with someone going, we need to know this stuff because we keep getting asked how well are we growing? Are we shrinking? Do we need more office space? Is it who should be taking on the mantle? That comes on to my closing question. But should it be the business going out and finding and installing it? Should it be the landlord providing it? What's your view on that?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one. I think there's definitely a responsibility on the owners to, I think, provide buildings that certainly at a core, give a certain level of insight from a building. I think there's definitely a need for that. But the reality is that takes investment. That takes time, and are they going to do that or not is still up for debate. And so I think ultimately the better advised occupiers are, if the drive comes from them, I think only at that point will we start to see a change. If enough businesses are requesting this information beyond just going out and buying it in themselves, that will actually start to force more of a change. I mean, ultimately a revolution has to start from below, right? But right now there's just not that level of education or awareness within occupiers, I think, to even be asking those questions. So until that happens, I think there's a way to go.
Why do you think that is? Because I am obviously a property technology evangelist. I've been going to trade shows for far too long, and I've actually seen Simon at a few of them as well, nosing around to what's out there. What do you think is that holding back that gap? Because there is an abundance of solutions, whether it's a CCTV using essentially like presence detection, it could be under desk sensors, it could be your access control, your swipe card data. There are so many different ways of getting this stuff to businesses to understand. Like, why do you think they're not engaged in it if there is a clear value internally for them? Like, where do you think the gap is at the moment? Like, why don't people know about it? Because I'd imagine, I always say, if I go to a dinner party and I say I'm a PropTech consultant, everyone sort of moves away from me because they're like, I've got no idea what that guy does. Whereas if I said I was an AI consultant, I think I'd probably be holding court with people who've all got an opinion about it. So do you think it's a marketing and awareness thing from the sensor industry? Because it's big in the world of PropTech, but not big in the world of occupiers.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think there's definitely a marketing and awareness piece. I think, like you said, that, if you look at UK businesses, whilst there's a certain number of large organizations, most of it is made up of, this small to mid market where, like you said, it's not their core day to day. And almost until they're at that point of needing the data to make the decisions, they're not even aware of wanting to track it. And so there's definitely a need, I think, from certainly the sort of, I suppose, the product perspective of awareness. But again, I see a lot of this sitting with that occupier advisory piece, and the agents are the ones right now, they should be the advocates for it that are educating in order to start to drive that change. But yeah, it is incredible how few are actually kind of aware of what they could be doing.
Because the other kind of stakeholder in that occupier build out process would be design and build, right? Which is, again, I had a very interesting podcast conversation with someone about it, whereas technology and sensors just aren't part of the design considerations. You say technology to a design and build company, not all of them, obviously. But they kind of go, well, you mean meeting room AV? I was like, that's not really what I mean. No. But like, so do you think maybe it could be surveyors, but also maybe the construction industry needs to be a bit more tech savvy to help educate these SME businesses?
Yeah, I think that would definitely help. I think a lot of that still comes down to budgets, and once it gets to that point, people are focused on the fit out. They're not focused on necessarily some of those elements. But I think if that was driven further up the chain at kind of the earlier stages of conversation, then it could filter through. But again, I don't think that isn't happening.
Yeah, which is a frustration. It's one of the reasons why when we audit buildings, it's one of the questions we ask, like, do you have the ability to track this at the moment? And it is a very low percentage across the UK from an occupancy perspective, which seems like a pretty low bar, because it can give you so much. I do find, though, when it comes to anything to do with technology, return on investment is the sort of the next thing that comes out of, like, how am I going to get my money back from it? And do you feel that there needs to be a better positioning of data and sensors? So it's less about, yes, you're going to have to spend X amount to get this data. However, if you had this data on your last office move on this site, we could have given you this advice that could have saved you 10, 100X on your like real estate strategy? Do you think there's a disconnect between, "Oh, I've got to buy this bloody sensor, and actually this sensor could really help me execute a better strategic decision"?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's, often there's that short-term view on investment like that, where it's just, yeah, if we're going through a fit out, why would we spend X on that when, right now we just need to focus on making the office look good. But it's that having that, I suppose, forward thinking of as the business grows and develops, if you've got that technology embedded, the ability for you to make decisions that then save you significant amounts of money are then there. And often we're finding, when a business gets to a certain size and they want to make that decision, it's too late because they've not actually got the technology.
Yeah, it's like have a look back at the last 3 years occupancy data. It's like, no. Like, best of luck.
We try and come in from a bit more of a, I suppose, strategic point of view. It's not just about this office move, but long term, are you considering the next 2-3 moves as your businesses grow? And that needs to be, I think, the mindset for more of these companies.
Yeah. We also talk about like the construction mindset in real estate. We very much see as we're very good at building things. And then once we've built it, we finished it, it's built. But actually from a data perspective, that's the start, not the end.
Yeah.
And therefore having that, like bridging the gap between fantastic for finishing the building, guys, now everyone's going to move in, we're going to move around with it, we're going to do whatever. This is the start of the actual feedback loop and the use of this building. So this is the beginning, not the end. And there's often this like strange tension between those that are desperate to get it done, finish and off site and onto the next one, versus those that then move in that need to have this longer term value of it, because those stakeholders aren't part of it. It's not my problem.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is a challenge. I suppose then, obviously we've covered a lot of topics in a short space of time, which I always appreciate. But as in within the surveying teams you have, do you find the guys coming to you now with going, can we add this data in? Can we add that data in? Or this bit of feedback? Do you see that there's a like kind of internal flywheel now? Now you're giving people access to more information. They're like, actually, I want more and more and more. Is it still that you're kind of going, give me more ideas, guys, for us to build into what we're doing?
Yeah, I'd say only up until recently that is now the case. Like it has taken time to, it's one thing building the product, is then another thing actually ingraining it, adopting it, and actually getting clients seeing the value. And I think we're at a point now where we've got enough clients on board that are working with it, seeing the value, that we are getting our surveyors saying, oh, I'm working with this with my client on this. We'd love to be able to pull in X, Y, and Z. How do we go about doing that? And that's where we've wanted it to be. But it has taken time to get there. And so it's exciting that we, that momentum then starts to build quicker when you can actually have those individuals championing it rather than always being the one pushing it from.
You're flying the flag,
front.
being like, I've got this great thing, let's use it. It's like, no, it's fine. I'm just going to do it in PDF, leave me alone.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, and I suppose our hope is that the rise of the AI products make people data curious, and the more curiosity they have and the more realization of, I can get this information, or I should be able to get this information, why can't I? Will hopefully then galvanize people to be like, well, if I can't get it, I want to get it, why can't I get it? And therefore, hopefully that will kind of build momentum around the wider world of kind of property technology, is my hope. But I'm glad to hear that from a surveying perspective, it's definitely adding value. From your roadmap then of where you guys are going next, like what are you seeing as kind of the next iteration of the data platform with clients? Is there going to be a big change, or are you going to keep on reinforcing and building what you've already built?
Yeah, I think there's still a consolidation piece. We still want to get it in front of a lot more clients than we have. The more that are using it, the more valuable their data can become. I think in terms of roadmap, we're always looking for ways that we can connect into more things. So like you said, you talk about working with buildings that have technology that's already available that we can access. That's definitely something that we're continuing to look at, and certainly being able to recommend now that we're making people aware of this. They're then starting to ask us, well, what products do you recommend that we actually ask for or we put in, which then starts to become exciting. So we can actually start to recommend key products that we know we can pull the data in on from our platforms. So that's certainly one thing. And I think further than that is then it's giving the client more access and control of their own data. So then being able to interrogate it through agents and things like that to a point where they have a greater visibility than they do at the moment. But right now it's still I think consolidation and just getting more technology integrated into their current buildings, really.
It's really interesting to hear, kind of almost moving into the world of digital consultancy. Good on you. I'm glad to hear it. More people advocating for things going to buildings. And I suppose that journey then, I would imagine, like, do you already have a couple of things that you don't have to name drop them, but have you kind of already built that integration path? Because we know from our experience that every building's a snowflake, which what we mean by that is it's slightly different.
Yeah.
So you have a different building management system, different lighting system, different sensor, if they even have one. So do you see that as a risk potentially, or are you hoping that you've already got a couple under the belt from an integration perspective and you're like, we know what we're doing now and we can add in more and more and more?
Yeah, I think that there's no doubt that is necessarily a risk. And, I think we're all aware that I struggle to see that necessarily changing. Buildings are all so different and there's so many different options for everything. I think from our perspective, it's, what we've built has an open API. And as long as the products that we're interacting with also have one, we plan to be able to make our suite available to any of those. And now that does mean us having to build those integrations one at a time.
Yeah.
But at the moment, we're at a point where that is manageable. I mean, ultimately, there will come a stage where,
fingers crossed,
we have to pick certain providers and stick with those. But right now, we're at a point where we're quite happy to work with anyone.
Yeah, I suppose, as you said, like, you're still educating the clients to get these things, let alone worrying about having to integrate with them, right? So it's kind of, you don't need to worry about you've got 50 different sensors in your offices. It's like, you have no sensors. We need one sensor, please, to do something. Yeah. I suppose then, on the sustainability and data points, it's interesting to me, and we spent a lot of time over the last few months looking at utilities and energy consumption demand and those parts of it. And from a business cost perspective, you've got people, real estate, and energy. Energy in the UK and energy demand is a continual challenge for this. Is energy and consumption data like part of your data set of looking at, okay, we're at 50% occupancy on a Friday, is the energy changing or adapting to it? It's my definition of a smart building is that if no one's there, turn it off.
Right.
So do you see energy coming into the radar of people wanting to know about how and what energy they're consuming in their offices, or is it still more about real estate decisions versus operational decisions?
Yeah, I think at the moment it is still kind of those operational real estate decisions, but I think where I see it and want it to go is much more in that realm where not only are they using it for that, but they're also using it as to how do we run our office in the most efficient way, and in order to do that, they need access to those energy consumption details. And we at the moment are at a point where some of those figures are provided manually, but that can only go so far. It needs to be a point where they have that visibility in one place so that they can actually start to make some changes that ultimately can kind of save a lot of kind of operational cost.
Yeah, we often talk about the performance gap. Sort of the best kept secret in the world of facilities is that kind of everyone knows that the building was built one way, but then the occupiers move in, they move all the kit around, and then it sort of spins the wheel off into a completely different operational direction. And sometimes they just keep the building running as opposed to stopping and going, is this actually running well? Should we change it? But often, if no one asks the question,
exactly,
and the AC still works, they're like, okay, let's just.
And I think we still see it's almost it's just an accepted part of office cost. This is what it costs to run my business, rather than actually is this being run in the best way and where are the efficiencies. So there's still a huge education piece needed, I think, in that front.
Yeah, I suppose it can go back. You can't buy what you don't know exists, right? But I think it's, I suppose, pertinent also in the world that we spend in is that operational and experience part of real estate. But actually, ultimately, listening and talking to you about what businesses care about is that like slight tension between what a landlord agent and a landlord design team thinks they should build speculatively for a business versus actually what a business needs. We still think there's this opportunity for collaboration between the two, so they don't make an assumption or make a guess or value engineer out the wrong thing. And actually, if the things that people care about over and above knowing when their break dates are, which should be pretty fundamental for anyone, but actually it's the people and utilization bit, which is still kind of the real, like the sort of the C-suite level information. Everything else is sort of still on the we'll get to a later list, right? Is without putting words in your mouth, but that sort of is the core part of valuable data at the moment from buildings, which they should be able to give, but not every building can.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, look, again, even with the shift in offices trying to get more people back in, realizing as more kind of, I think, renewals have happened since COVID, and an understanding that we're still paying for space that's not properly being used. How do we design it in the way that it, best kind of not only uses the space but is best for our employees as well? And so there is a shift coming where those questions are starting to become, a core part of kind of day to day. But again, there's a way to go in terms of actually having the data to be able to make the right decision on what they change, rather than it just being kind of assumption led.
Anecdotal. That's really interesting. I suppose it's good and bad to know that the occupiers would probably face similar challenges that real estate owners do about the detailed understanding of what's going on behind the scenes, or in the windowless basement of facilities management offices. Well, I've got two closing questions which we always ask people. One, which I don't know what your answer will be, but is, what's the one piece of technology you wish more people knew about that they don't know about today?
I think when I was kind of thinking about that, I think for us personally, it's definitely a lease management tool of some kind. Like, again, it still amazes me how few occupiers have a centralized kind of source of their office data, and that goes beyond just lease information, but operating data, energy data. It is still incredible how few companies we interact with can provide us that in one place. The amount of time it takes to consolidate that is huge. So I think yes, we've built a tool to help sort of, I suppose, pull that information together, but there's loads of things out there that can certainly aid that process. That's definitely one. But
they're just not being adopted.
No. Or again, they're just, like you say, businesses are there with their primary driver. It's not enough of a consideration from even from a kind of C-suite level until it's at that critical point. And so no one has that responsibility of keeping the information in one place. It's kind of just left to sit in, whether it's in legal or whether it's past dealings.
Yeah, interesting. So kind of actually the baseline of just knowing where your offices are, what they are, what you're paying, what you're not paying, like that absolute baseline. Well, it's good. I mean, I kind of really appreciate that. The second question is, who should be leading this innovation drive in real estate? Should it be the owners, the operators, property managers? We haven't touched on them much, or the occupiers? Who do you think should be driving innovation into real estate?
Yeah, I think it's hard to pick one of those, because I think there's definitely a kind of collaboration between the three required. I think there's a real responsibility for owners to certainly at a core provide a certain level on all buildings. But ultimately, I feel it needs to be driven by the occupiers in terms of the information that they need to run their businesses properly. If they're not the ones pushing for that, then ultimately, is anything going to change? But having to caveat that right now, unless someone's educating them to want to make those sorts of decisions, that won't happen. So right now, I think it starts with the advisors and the agents, but ultimately that needs to shift to the occupiers being the one to
demand
drive
it. We're paying the rent, we're paying the service charge. We want these things out of our building.
Because if that becomes the norm, then all the owners will have to fall in line, because it's an expectations across the board. Whereas at the moment, it's not. So there's a select few doing it, but most.
It's minority, not majority.
Yeah, exactly.
Do you think there needs to be some sort of like benchmarking tool or question set, perhaps to compare buildings, or to give people a framework of knowing the right questions to ask?
Yeah, definitely. I think right now, like we've been saying, there's an education piece where people don't even know what to ask, what to compare, what to expect. And if there was, like you said, a minimum standard across every building that was kind of rated against, it would start to, I think, bring this to more of a forefront and be a part of almost every decision.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Which is great to hear. Hence why I'm very glad that we built an audit and called it a very jazzy name of every building, because that's our objective, is to be able to compare any building against the same set of technical specifications. But we're also acutely aware of the things we've spoken about, where the CEO driver is, is going to have it, the location data of businesses, the total occupancy cost, sustainability metrics, both for the business and that building, and then probably the technology sits at that bottom bit. So we're always really aware that you're not going to go into a presentation with a business and go, right, everyone's commute time is you should be here, but we found this building that's completely over there that's got the most amazing tech in it. You should go there, because they'll just sort of laugh you out the room. I don't think you get many re-retained clients, but I suppose it's that, like, understanding the value of it, articulating it and educating them as part of the journey. It's one of the questions or one of the sections on that whole strategy, right? I hope you agree with me on
No,
that.
absolutely. And that's where we want, even with our location analysis tool, as well as all of that information, we want to be benchmarking buildings for that reason. So it becomes a part of the decision. But like you say, there's not enough of them right now, to the point where often if commute data is of value, you've often then not got any energy data or anything to actually add into the mix right now.
Yeah. So you can't actually add anything into it. So you're not lost, but you can't improve what you can't measure, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Amazing. Well, look, thank you so much for your time. I've really enjoyed the conversation. I'm always really passionate about learning from people that work in different rooms to us, as far as the conversation stuff that goes on behind the scenes, and listening to what occupiers want is something that I always get frustrated by when I hear a panel of owners and operators talking about what occupiers want without an occupier on the stage to fight the corner. So, obviously somebody that's been in the room listening to businesses and listening to the data that they see as being valuable, and then kind of hopefully sharing a bit of that here is really helpful to know exactly where they're at. And, they, as with real estate, have got a long way to go, but really glad to hear there's products like you that are out there that can at least help people tell them what on earth they've got, and as a starter for 10. But
yeah, absolutely. Brilliant. Yeah, thanks for having me, Freddie. It's been great.
No, really good. Thanks, mate.